this is the cutting edge, or it's the return of the cutting edge, or it's the second coming, or it's the premiere episode. And this is with Dr. Lee Pearson and Dr. Robert Stubblefield and Steve Richens. And we have a premier guest today, Dr. Harry Binswanger. Our topic today is introspection as a skill, a transformative idea, of course, teaching students why, when, and how to read their own minds. With that, I wanted to thank ARC UK for its collaboration. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lee.
Okay, thanks, Steve. It turns out, more or less by accident, that both Harry and I were involved in a presentation on this topic, more or less, on teaching introspection in the schools to a school system, a rather good one, as school systems go these days, in Florida, that happens to be right where Harry lives. So he was there in person. I was there virtually, and we did a presentation. So we can talk about what we did there, talk something about what we did there, maybe adding a few points more for the philosophical interests of this audience. So let me go ahead and go to with Harry. And of course, we can introduce. I don't think we need to introduce Harry more. We've introduced him a few times, but I always like to introduce him as the author of How We Know, which is a book you should read if you haven't already read it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Harry, see what he has to say about teaching introspection, particularly to children or high school kids, either one.
Thanks. We presented to a range of teachers, and a position I didn't know about called coach of teachers, which is kind of a meta teacher, a person who's helps teachers when their knowledge may be inadequate to cover a particular. That's what I gathered, but this is a person who is to the teacher as the teacher is to the student. So I call him a meta teacher. And a couple of administrators, and there were about 20 people there, ranging from people who taught first or second grade to people who taught late high school. I started off, and then Lee went to the more detailed presentation. I started off by explaining what is philosophy and what is psychology as a lead-in to what is introspection, because introspection involves consciousness, and consciousness is treated by both epistemology and psychology, and perhaps being too abstract, I wanted to explain the difference, I being a philosopher and Lee Pearson being the psychologist of the team. So after that, I defined introspection, but in a very informal way, as the observing and naming of what one is doing with one's mind, or in one's mind. I forget exactly the wording I used. So I wanted to keep it simple and non-technical, informal. And I then turned to the benefits of learning to introspect, or of teaching introspection to kids so they would know how to introspect, because the naming part in particular is an advanced kind of action. It's a sophisticated thing to do. Observing what's going on in your mind, the equivalent of the perceptual level, but for introspection, you just need to be told, do it. but the naming part takes some skill and training. And I think it's very important to tell them to do it, because I didn't know. I didn't know to do that. I was pretty self-aware, but I didn't know that I was self-aware. I didn't know that I could choose to be self-aware and choose to steer my consciousness. Not until I heard Ayn Rand talk at MIT, and she pointed that out, which was flabbergasting to me. So I ended with a quote from Ayn Rand about thinking requires full focused awareness, and it's not automatic, and you have a basic choice. You can focus your mind to full purposeful awareness of reality or drift along in a semi-conscious daze, and said that this was what brought me into philosophy, but which is certainly true when I heard that. For this audience, other than reporting on the event, I think it would be interesting to talk about the difference between naming and observing, really, as parts of introspection. But I also want to talk about how do you teach introspection to 5-year-olds, because there were a range of teachers from, as I said, the people who are teaching adolescents and late adolescents and to 5-year-olds. And I think it's important to teach them certain things, but maybe I should hold off on that, Lee, or should
No,
I?
go ahead. Why not? Or you want to
Well,
talk about? So you want to talk about the naming and observing thing, which is quite interesting
yeah,
and tricky.
yeah.
We could do that a bit first.
Well, let me go on with this then,
Okay.
and then
All
we'll
right.
turn to the tricky part.
All right.
I think you need to tell young children, 5, 4, that they have a mind and they can think. Thinking is different from talking. And I think the way in is that you can talk to yourself in your head without saying anything out loud that other people can hear. I think it's important for kids to know that others don't know what they are thinking, that it's a private activity, that they can think anything they want and no one will know. I'm thinking that this is important at home if they've got bad parents and they don't want their parents to know that they're disagreeing with them or whatever. And then they need to know that they can do things to control the actions of their minds. I'm reminded of the game Simon Says, or the game May I. The game is that you do what the leader, the teacher usually says, like put your hand on your head, only if it's preceded by Simon Says. Or you can take a step only if you ask, may I? And this game can be used to tell them how to do things in their mind to succeed at this game. Because what will happen is the teacher will say, Simon Says, put your hand on your head. They all do it. Simon Says, raise your other hand. And they all do. Simon Says, lower your other hand. Put that hand on your head. And most of them will then not realize that Simon didn't say that, and they get it wrong. So the simple stratagem is say to yourself all the time, did Simon say it? Did Simon say it? Did Simon? I mean, you don't have to say it every second, but every couple of seconds, did Simon say it? You need to keep it alive in your mind. You can say things to yourself to set a temporary standing order. I wouldn't call it that, but there are things you can do in your mind to succeed at this game. Another thing I would
I just
tell them
interject
is,
one thing about that. It just occurred to me that might be.
yeah,
There's another game called Mother May I that's pretty similar.
yeah, that's what I said. May I?
Well, there's another game that's called Mother May I. I'd like to do this. I don't remember the details, but it occurs
You
to me
take
that
a step.
yeah, that Mother May I, as Simon says, is a better game than Mother May I, because Mother May I encourages blind obedience. You just
Oh,
do
I
things.
think that's a little exaggerated.
I don't know. Okay, maybe it just anyway that occurred to me as an advantage, as Simon says. It's not as
It has advantage
yeah.
of you have to do the child has to do the behavior, has to emit something. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be Mother May I, it can just be May I. And if they forget, so they're told take 2 giant steps forward, and they're supposed to say, "May I?" or "Mother, may I?" "Yes, you may." And then they can. But if you say take 2 small steps forward for the next thing, and they don't take the action of saying "May I?" or "Mother," whatever it is, they are out, or they're whipped with a lash until they're bleeding. So that's another one where they can keep something alive in their mind by repeating it. It's not a great skill to have. You need it when you, for instance, look up. Well, we don't do that anymore. Let's say you're looking through your email table of contents. I was going to say look in the phone book for a name. So you're looking, remember dictionaries? There were actual physical books that had, you're looking up a word, syzygy, and you're in the approximate error syzygy. You have to keep saying it to yourself as you read the other words, or else you'll go crazy. So you need to know there are things you can do. It's not that those things are particularly great things. Another thing that they need to learn is the emotion words and what they come from. This they can learn very early, and you need pictures or drawings, and maybe a little story. And let's say the story is that Johnny's mother. We don't have Johnny anymore. Abdul's mother is promised him that he will get a pony for his birthday, and he's very excited, but when the birthday comes there's no pony, as she was just saying that broke her promise. And you have a picture, a cartoon of little Abdul like that, and you ask the class, what does he feel? And you want to get them to angry. Just that simple. And why is he angry? Because the promise was broken. That wasn't fair, was it? No. So when something makes you angry, it's probably that you think something is unfair. Now, maybe it wasn't unfair, but you think it's unfair, and then you talk about that. What does that mean? It's amazing what kids don't know. I didn't know when I was 4 that the mere fact that an idea occurred to me and felt right didn't prove it. I mean, I didn't have the concept of proof. So I don't know if everyone's heard this story, but I got the idea that if you washed your hands and dried them without rinsing the soap off, you'd never catch a cold. And I ran in excitedly to my mother to tell her about my great discovery, and she demurred from it. And my reaction was, but it felt right. So you mean it could feel right and that be true? Huh, who knew? And that's the point, that people aren't born knowing that what occurs to them needs validation.
Yeah, if I could just interject
Yeah,
something
please.
briefly for a moment here. And I think it was 1993, Thomas Sowell observed that a big problem with today's young children, which still maybe is even worse today, it's probably worse today, is that they don't distinguish, or they can't distinguish between thinking and feeling. The two categories are the same for them. And of course, and thinking about that, it occurs to me that the reason that they can't distinguish it is that in order to make that distinction, you have to have a concept of volition, of free will, because that is the big difference. The feeling happens to you, as Harry said yesterday. Feelings happen to you, and thoughts are things you do. You have control over. The fact that that is why thoughts trump feeling cognitively. That's the reason, is that you have control over your thoughts and you can correct your errors. And feelings are automatic responses, and they just go where they go. But children don't know this, and that's an important fact they should discover and be helped to discover introspectively as early as possible. But they'll have to know about free will a little bit, or not technically, philosophically, but at an introspective level.
I view the difference between thoughts and feelings as what occurs to you automatically from whatever context you've got activated. It's a snap judgment, or it's the affective state that results from a snap judgment. The volitional part is your considered judgment, and that's the thought part. I think you agree with that, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So it's the same database. It's not that there's a different channel that you tune into feelings versus thinking, but one is the result of being in control of all the data that is from that database, and the other is just whatever happens to be activated at a given time, which could be an appropriate emotion. Doesn't mean your emotions are inappropriate. Probably most emotions are appropriate, but you don't know until you activate the full context whether the judgment that the emotion comes from is correct.
The point you made about that they're all from the same database, I think that's an important point that is missed in Daniel Kahneman's well-known Thinking Fast and Slow, where he distinguishes what he calls system one and system two. Mm-hmm. I don't think there is a system one. I don't think there's any evidence for system one and system two. What there's evidence for is a system, a cognitive system, namely the brain, the subconscious, which is either under management or not under management. You're operating it volitionally, or you're letting it happen to you. And either way, you have, as you put it, the same database involved. That's what I think is the case there.
Yeah, good point. And the climax of that is, of course, it's hard to have a climax back in time, but Plato thinks there are three parts of the soul, and he thinks the reason is just a different voice within you than your emotions. And Freud, of course, I guess Freud is even worse than Plato. The id, there's a bubbling cauldron of autonomous desires, and then the ego mediates between that and the taboos of the superego, which have no basis whatsoever. And it tries to make it's like the Arabs and Israel, except that it's like one Arab country and another Arab country, and you're mediating. Can't we have a ceasefire? Maybe if I give you this, it'll be all right. So anyway, getting off of Freud, it's important to know that it's your ideas and your values that are producing the emotion, even if the emotion is completely out of context and based on a snap judgment that when you think about, oh no, no, I shouldn't think of it that way at all. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the emotion will go away, but it will be lessened. That's another topic entirely. So I'd like kids to know the names of the basic emotions and perhaps start down a path of learning the names of more subtle emotions. But the main thing is that the emotions come from an idea, that they're not from your glands, that they're from what you think, either snap judgment wise or considered judgment wise. So, what else did I want to teach the little guys? So, we have just a review. You have a mind. What goes on in your mind is private and under your control. You can do things with your mind to get better results. And your feelings are different from your considered judgment. And here's what the feelings come from in general. By in general, I mean anger is a response to feeling that you've been unjustly treated. Sadness is a response to the loss of a value, that kind of thing. I think that is enough of me. You want to take the reins
Okay,
here?
that's good. So when we were talking yesterday, Dr. Benswanger discussed some of these things, and also he made some points about the nature of philosophy that we don't need to review with this group. And then what I've tried to do is I tried to talk about introspection in a more specific sense. Because introspection, broadly speaking, covers anything that's going on in your mind, identifying or observing anything that's going on in your mind. Well, let's talk about that naming and observing just for a minute, and then I've got some other things. But let's before we forget about that, because that is an interesting distinction. I'm not sure the word observing is a somewhat is it ambiguous? It's at least a word with shifting with a vague, somewhat vague meaning. It's somewhere between perceiving and conceptualizing. It's kind of perched in between those things, or maybe oscillates back and forth between those things. Because when you say you observe something, you can be talking about pure perception, or you can be talking about some kind of thought process involved while you're perceiving. When you're looking at the birds and you figure out, oh, that is a yellow-bellied sapsucker. I mean, you're doing more than just perceiving it at that point, and you're doing the naming. And in other words, naming can be part of observing under some construction. So I'm not sure there's a hard and fast distinction. Also, I don't think there's a lot. I don't anymore think that there is a lot of pure perceptual kind of level activity in introspection. That's what I said in my PhD thesis long ago in a galaxy far away at Cornell University. I claimed that introspection was basically a form of direct perception, analogous to what J.J. Gibson talks about in perception. But it really isn't. I don't think that, because there is no information basis for it like there is for stimulus and light. And when you're aware, your consciousness is what you're aware of. You're already aware of it. You don't have to look at it to be aware of it. You're aware of it. What you have to do, if you want to go further with your awareness, is identify it conceptually. Now, I do think there is something else besides the conceptual part that's kind of alertness. You want to be, you can make yourself alert to things happening in your mind that you might not notice. So, for example, I strongly recommend that good thinkers try to be alert to, pretty much all the time, be alert to inklings, feelings about thoughts, feelings about how the process of thought is going. Is it going well or poorly? And those are important indicators. And you can, set yourself to be more alert to that or not. And that isn't really a purely conceptual activity. So there's that kind of stuff. But I think mostly what introspection in its most fundamental sense, the genus, and I learned from Harry that you should always look at the genus of concepts that you're thinking about. The genus of introspection in that sense is thinking. It's a form of thinking. It's conceptually identifying what's going on in your mind. And in my view, the purpose of doing that is quite fundamental. Introspection guides volition, or introspection guides volitional attention. When you exert the mental effort of volitional attention, it has to go somewhere, and where you send it is a product that actually has antecedent factors involved. There are many things that go into where you direct your attention, but introspection is very helpful in finding the right place to put your volitional attention, namely where usually you want to go to some concept that you're thinking about that you haven't thought enough about to get the knowledge from it that you need to keep your thought process going. There are a lot of times in thinking, thoughts slip by too quickly, or not thoughts, just thoughts. Let's say concepts slip by too quickly in your thinking, and you end up getting stuck or making mistakes or getting sidetracked. All kinds of problems, but that can be fixed if you can introspectively identify what these are. And I have my favorite example. I think I won't bother to put it up on the screen. I'll just say it. My favorite example that I've used on Cutting Edge before, but that was a long time ago. And probably many of you have forgotten it, and many of you didn't hear it in the first place. So I'll try it out on you. You have 10 birds sitting on a wire. All but 7 fly away. How many are left? I'm kind of looking for a quick answer here. 10 birds sitting on a wire. All but 7 fly away. How many are left? Now, we have a intellectually powerful group listening to us, I'm sure. So a lot of you are going to get the right answer, of course. But it maybe even in those cases, the sucker answer might have at least crossed your mind for a second or two, and the sucker answer is 3. You think, well, you saw the 7. There's a total of 10, and so you do 7 minus 3. But the problem with that answer, well, the problem is it's wrong. But the reason it's wrong, the reason that you would miss it is if your thinking went too quickly over the all but part, especially the word but. And if you slow down and identify that that's where what I call the key concept, and a key concept is not just a concept that's important, it's a concept that's important, but slipped by too quickly, where there's important knowledge that you didn't activate, that you needed to activate from it to keep your thinking going, and you didn't do it. So key concept is important, plus slipped by too quickly, or sometimes not even considered at all in some cases. So in this case, it's the word but, and what you do, once you identify, if you can identify, that's where the trouble is. That's the introspective part. That's where I need to go to activate more knowledge. Then you ask yourself questions about it. And you go to the concept, by the way, you go to the reason you generally go to the conceptual level, to the level of a single concept. Sometimes it may be a little broader, maybe a phrase, say, but usually you go to the concept because that's where the knowledge is. The famous apocryphal saying about the bank robber Willie Sutton, who was asked, why do you rob banks? He said, well, that's where the money is. Well, why do we go to the level of concepts if you are directing your focus to improve your thinking, to make progress? Because that's where the knowledge is. The knowledge about any particular concept is stored in connection with that concept. You can verify that introspectively, and you can ask yourself questions. I recommend starting with, what's the definition of that concept? And then you ask for examples. Ask yourself for examples. And then I suggest, well, I have a lot of suggestions, but there's some others. Another one is look for relationships to other concepts in that situation. But it would start with, what's the definition? And that will solve a lot of these situations. And you ask, what does but mean? Well, but means, I'm thinking, I've got to do a little thinking here, means something like other than. So, it was all the birds other than 7 flew away. Well, that means the 7 stayed. And that, of course, is the correct answer. I've got many other examples of that, but I think we don't have time today. It is our intention or at least we've discussed this as an intention for future cutting edges, to provide many examples of focused thinking or refocusing as a activity, a continuing activity of going deeper in thinking. How to go deeper in thinking by focusing it more specifically on key concepts. We're going to try to illustrate that with our guests, with our topics. We're going to try to go deeper. That's what cutting edge. That's what the cutting edge is for, to cut deeper into things. And we're going to use this technique and illustrate it, and hope that maybe in the hope that some of you will be able to glean something from that. So that's what we talked about, or I talked about with the students. I mean, there's more to the talk. I can't give the whole talk today, but the idea is that today's students, and the acronym I like to use, don't know how to sit. They don't know how to sustain independent thinking. That's an acronym. They don't know how to keep a thought process going. They get stuck and they say, what the great 20th century philosopher Curly Howard, member of the Three Stooges, for those who wonder, what Curly Howard said, which is, I'm trying to think, but nothing happens. And I see that with students all the time, even good students, maybe even especially good students, that are taught well to do algorithmic processing. If they have an exact procedure, they can do something. But when the situation doesn't quite fit the algorithms that they know, their gears grind to a halt, and they say, I'm trying to think, nothing happens. Or more often they will say something like, I have no idea what to do. And I will say, okay, well, you have no idea yet. Let's try to refocus it. And if students can learn how to do this, and I shouldn't say they don't know how to do it at all. STEM students know how to do sustained thinking in their fields of computer science or mathematics in particular. They can sustain a pretty good process, at least within certain limits. But I've seen those kids outside in humanities subjects, and they're just like children then, or babies. They're not any better than the other students. And once you get them out of their field, usually, I mean, there are exceptions, but usually you have trouble. But if they can learn how to do this, then they will not be as susceptible to the propaganda, the political propaganda that we see when you see students, the spectacle of students at Columbia University, my old undergraduate and Harry's graduate school. It's supposed to be an elite university with top level students in it. And they're like sheep. They're just following the leaders. And when you ask them, what does it mean to be between the river and the sea? They don't know. They refer to their leaders. They refer you to their leaders when you ask them hard questions. There's a whole lot of that. And if we could cut that off earlier on, if we could get students to learn how to think on their own, sustain an independent thought process, then they won't be sheep. They will understand what it means to have agency, to be a free human being, and that will have a great effect on their political views. They'll be less likely to swallow the collectivist views that are rampant now. Socialism is big nowadays with the young. So I'm hopeful if we can at least get a start on that. That's how we can turn the tide. I don't think you can turn the tide just by pure politics. A couple of years ago, was it 3? Or in the early days of ARC UK, we had a session where there were several people. Harry was unfortunately not there, but we had several people representing various branches of philosophy.
No.
Yeah, we had one person was sadly represent politics. One, Shoshana Milgram, who represented aesthetics. We had somebody for what other branches? We didn't have anybody for metaphysics. Nobody thought that teaching metaphysics would change the world. But we had epistemology, actually psychoepistemology. That was me. And ethics, of course, we had ethics. And my view is that you really have to go down to epistemology, and particularly psychoepistemology, just to get the changes going. Any other method? Well, the one other method I thought had something going for it was aesthetics. If you had a artist, say a novelist, on Ayn Rand's level, though it has to be like that, you could maybe change the world, continue to change the world as she started. I think that's a possibility, but no such person exists at present. So I didn't think that was a likely way. So anyway, I think that we're trying to do something which I believe is quite important, getting what amounts to various forms of psychoepistemological training in the schools. And if we are succeeding, if we can succeed at that, and if the world doesn't collapse around us too quickly, things could we and others could possibly turn things around. Of course, the world has to last, and I don't personally know if it's going to. I'm not sure. I'd better stop there for a moment. See if it's Bob's looks like he wants to jump in here.
Well, I was just wondering, the university professor or administrators, presidents who were also victims of this failing to think about what from the river to the sea means, would them having known about introspection have helped at all?
Okay, I'll just give a quick answer, and maybe Harry will comment. I would say possibly yes, if you got them a lot earlier in their education. Not by the time they get to grad school, it's tough. It's not impossible. I actually run into a few people that I was able to myself to turn in a better direction, even when they were grad students. But it's pretty hard by then. So you get them early. I think yes, you could possibly save some of those people. I don't know, because the kind of person that becomes a university president, maybe this is an overgeneralization, to me is likely not to be a good person. So maybe there's a problem there. Anyway, Harry, what do you think?
To Bob's question, or
yeah, or anything else. But let's start with Bob's
yeah,
question.
I agree with you that if they had been taught from an early age, or not taught, but if they were given the idea that they could think and that thinking was up to them and they had a choice, if that could be connected to independence, then I don't think they would be these, what we just appeasing collectivists, the semi-collectivists appeasing total collectivists. But then they wouldn't be chosen by the faculty to be president. I mean, I don't know that the faculty does it directly, but the faculty has to be satisfied with the president.
So we have to do the same thing with the faculty. The same issue
but
has to apply there as well.
Another thing enters there, which is you have to refute the ideas of Kant. You have to explode that, because the reason why the bad, like collectivism, bad ideas are there is that they're convinced. Sure, there's some second-handed following by professors who teach these fields, but basically there's an argument and it sounds good to them. So that those arguments need to be exploded. And in some cases, they're not arguments, it's just no other alternative was ever put forward until Ayn Rand. So
or J.J. Gibson.
Or what?
Gibson.
Yeah.
My professor in grad school, as some of you know, was J.J. Gibson, who was a perception, who was the leading advocate of direct realism. There's a real world out there, and you perceive it. And an opponent of the standard perception theory, which derived in part from Kant. It wasn't just Kant, but Kant was a major perpetrator of the theory of sensations integrated into perception. In fact, that theory, this gets into other issues, but even objectivism has a theory that somewhat derives from Kant in the perception area. It's a little bit different. Kant said, and I'm not a Kant scholar. I'm going on what I know from many sources, though, on this point. Kant says sensations are integrated by the mind, and objectivism says sensations are integrated by the brain. Now, I think both of those things are wrong, and I think if you realize that, as Gibson did, you undercut Kant very early in the game. I mean, Gibson said, he told me directly, Kant is his enemy. He said so in so many words. And, his refutation basically amounts to showing that the perception theory is completely wrong. And that with that, the whole theory
The sensation theory.
The perception theory of Kant as being based on sensation.
Right.
The sensation-based perception theory that Kant advocated was incorrect. And if you can realize that, then the whole theory falls to the ground just from that. However, of course, not everybody in academia by a long shot accepts Gibson. He is a well-respected, a well-known view, but the mainstream view of cognitive psychology is straight out of Kant and others. Representationalism, the mind creates representations. What you're aware of are representations, not the world. There's no way to become aware of the world. We could all be in the matrix. This is the common. It's gotten worse in cognitive psychology, not better, actually, over the years. So Gibson has not prevailed, and Ayn Rand has not prevailed yet. But we still have time, don't we, guys? Steve, you want to jump in on this somewhere?
In regards to Kant, I'm no Kant scholar, but self-perception in introspection for him was still an appearance. And the early introspectionists, their mistake, and the mistake that's still being made, is they're talking about introspection as perception. And that's an indirect way of looking at it, because we don't perceive inside our mind. Lee has stated before that when you're looking in your mind, and this is an advanced view of introspection, but you're looking at abstraction. You're looking at abstractions in general. You're not perceiving, you're not reading your mind, you're not observing your mind. But we use these words like reflect, but you're not actually reflecting. Those are physical, material terms, and they aid in Kant's obfuscation that what you're seeing is appearance. Because if it's perception, it's a constant feedback loop.
Well, you mentioned there the early introspectionists as being mistaken here, and actually, some of them were and some of them weren't. The ones that were at my school, at my graduate school, Cornell, who started psychology, introspective psychology in America, were representationalists, and there's all sensations, and they created kind of a categorization or a catalog of sensations of various kinds, and that was all wrong, and it soon died out. There was a valid form, in my opinion, of introspection in Germany, in Würzburg, Germany, under the guidance of a professor called Kulpe, I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, but Kulpe, who was an avowed opponent of Kant. And they had an introspection where it was not introspection on sensations or anything like that. It was just reporting what was going on in your mind. It was a fairly commonsensical form of introspection. And they discovered some interesting things, like they probably coined the term, I think, automatization. I think the idea was there already. James had habit, but I think they coined the term automatization. They discovered the aha experience.
Can I break in here, Lee? Mm-hmm. I have about 16 things to say, and I don't think people are that interested in 19th century German psychology.
The German guys, those guys are good. But anyway, sure, go ahead. Sorry.
I disagree with Steve. I think it is direct perception. It's not sensory perception, but you are aware of what's going on in your mind. You hear the thoughts, you can pay attention to them as you hear them. You have awareness of the feelings, you have awareness of the mental activities that you perform. So I don't think, versus Lee, I don't think thinking is the genius. I think awareness is the genius of introspection. There are two forms of awareness: awareness of the outside world and awareness of the actions of your own consciousness.
Mhm.
Observe is a kind of bridging term. I agree with what Lee said, that we're not exactly sure when you say observe whether you're including some conceptual identification in that. But whatever term we use for the apprehending of the activities of your own mind, they are presupposed by conceptualization. In other words, you cannot conceptualize what you cannot be aware of. So first you have to be non-conceptually, pre-conceptually aware of the actions of your consciousness. If you're then going to conceptualize them, you have to compare them, to see similarities and differences. So it can't all be the naming or identifying conceptually part. That's very important. That's where people go wrong. That's what that's where the meat of introspection is. But I would not go along with denying what is presupposed by that and is experienced directly. Now, in terms of slipping by, something could have slipped by in what Steve said, but I'm too wily for it to slip by. Steve, you said if you make a perception, a kind of perception of introspection, then you're in Kant's appearance versus reality trap. But why? That assumes that Kant's theory of perception is right. We're not in that trap in regard to sensory perception. We don't say, oh, well, since we're going to perceive sensorially, then Kant must be right. So to say we do something like perceiving without an organ, physical organ of our own thoughts, does not land us in Kantianism at all. Only if you accept the whole Kantian strategy. So I think that's very important about slipping by and watching for inklings. You have cognitive signals. They are your friend, and you should heed them. They are places to explore further. You need to zoom in on that part. And the example of the birds on the wire, it's not the best example, Lee. It's
but it's a
good.
quick one.
I mean, it's good,
It's quick.
but all but you if there are there are 10 birds and all but 7 leave, you would never say that. You would say some leave, but 7 stay, or
3 leave.
except for 7. You can't say exception when it's more numerous than the thing that you're accepting it from. That's very artificial.
It
But the
is
point is
artificial,
correct.
but I do think you can say it. I actually chose I don't remember how I first heard the question, but I chose 7 precisely because it encourages the wrong interpretation. Now, admittedly, you shouldn't do that if you're in writing, if you're a good writer. I just was looking for an example that's quick and clear. It's true. It's artificial. That is a true fact. If there aren't,
Yeah,
it's a
I
fact.
mean, it goes
That's a fact.
against the normal usage of all but. Anyway, your point is so important, and it needs to be trumpeted to the world. Thinking is not sliding over stuff. Thinking is riveting on something, fixating it, looking at how it differs from the thing next to it. It's isolating and fixating something for attention.
It's
And that
activating.
is, right?
Activating. When you focus on a concept, you are digging into the file folder for that concept that contains everything you know about it. And you need that knowledge. That knowledge is necessary for a thought process. Like
Yeah.
knowledge is both the product and the fuel of thinking. It's the necessary fuel, and you don't always, you don't get it automatically all the time. It doesn't happen automatically.
You said that yesterday, and I
Yes.
have a slight disagreement with that too. It's
Okay, good.
both the product and the material. It's both the product and the input, the material, the raw material.
Yeah.
But the fuel is values. The fuel is values, even
Well,
emotion.
it's a metaphor in either case. It's metaphorical. It's something that you use in your thought process. So either way, it's not. I mean, we always are looking for some way
Yeah.
of describing mental phenomena, and
Yeah.
it's difficult because we have to use these physical
That's right.
things. So it's not exact. That's true. It's not exact. I wanted to say something about just what you said so far quickly.
No, I'm done.
Oh, you're done. Okay.
Yeah.
Awareness, you could say, is the genus, but it's a higher genus. When I say thinking is the genus of introspection, I did say, in addition to that, well, let me be more clear about it, because maybe I wasn't clear enough. Introspection is one of these words, which there are many, that have more than one sense, more than one particular meaning. There are various things that you could call introspection. The one that I think is most important, is primary, is the conceptual identification of what's going on in your mind, because that's what you do to guide volition. And
It's
that's
not the
sense.
primary. It's the most important.
Most important. Okay.
Yeah, primary is first.
Most important.
Okay.
All right. Let's go with most important. So it's the most important. I believe it's the most important because it's the sense in which it guides the activity, introspective activity that guides volition. That's really important. But you can distinguish other things, which, like I said, alertness was one. I don't think perception is exactly right as a model, because the contents of consciousness are what you are already aware of, and the world is not what you're already aware of. Perception makes you aware of the world, so you don't really have to observe consciousness to be aware of what you're conscious of. You're already conscious of what you're conscious of. So when you say you observe it, what are we actually talking about there? I actually think that mainly, when you say we're observing, that's mainly naming. That's mainly conceptual. When that process, that intentional
But how do
process.
you have conceptual without awareness of the activities? It's not the contents, not the object of awareness that you're aware of when you introspect. It's the activity of awareness.
And the product.
And the product, yeah.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, it is in the nature of awareness that you are aware of those things. That's what awareness means. At some level, you're aware of that stuff. When you're observing,
I think that's possibly true.
Yeah. Now this is tricky area. This is difficult. This is a very difficult area.
Yeah, it's difficult. Yeah.
And I don't presume to have the final answer necessarily, but that's how I look at it. Is that there is a sense of it's not quite the same as perception anyway.
It's interesting that Ayn Rand, when she talks about the concept of consciousness and refers to the axioms in general to include that, she talks about what is directly perceived or directly experienced. And I think the experience is in there to cover the material that you form your introspective concepts from.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So she doesn't say, you're aware of reality and you're aware of the actions of your mind. She says you directly experience it. And that
Yes.
goes along with what you like to quote from Alan Godhealth, that every perception is me seeing something, me
Me
perceiving.
being aware of something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, there's a little problem here, and I don't know how to solve this problem either. But when Ayn Rand uses the term perceive, sometimes she means what I would mean by perceive, which is sensory perception based on information in the light. And other times she used it in a kind of old-fashioned sense of generalized awareness of the world.
That's
and
right.
There are some cases where I'm not certain about which one she's using in a particular case. There are some cases. So I'll just throw that out as a.
Well, why would she say in this case, it is what is perceived or directly experienced?
Yeah, that was.
I would like to make a point that I've been biting my tongue.
Go ahead, Bob. Sorry.
One of the things that Ayn Rand says is that what forming a concept does is to allow, and when you gave it a name, it allows that to be treated the same way as you treat perceptions.
Concretizes it, yeah.
Oh, you mean it as a unit, as a discrete, concrete thing.
Yeah.
Right. And now what a concept is, of course, is not a thing out in reality. It's your classification of things out in reality. So you're now able to treat classifications the same way you treat direct perceptions, direct objects out in.
Almost.
Yes. You couldn't have done it without having formed them, for example. And if you didn't form them correctly, you're not going to get the same results as how you get direct perceptions.
Well, I think words have, that's right. I think that's basically right. But I would say in addition to that, that what the word gives you, it gives you, and I'm going to speak metaphorically here. So again, it's going to be a little not exact probably, but a word gives you a handle for grabbing onto stuff and pumping the knowledge. I'm now starting to mix metaphors maybe, but pumping the knowledge out of the file.
No, it's a handle of a pump.
Handle of a pump. You need that handle to be able to get the knowledge out of the file folder. It's crucial.
Yeah.
So when, Richard Feynman has one of his little essays, he says, when I learned about names from my father, and the birds have all these different names, but I realized that he said that the names aren't important. It doesn't matter what you call it. And there's a certain point to that, but there's another sense in which that's just wrong. It is very important and cognitively crucial to name stuff, to have names, so that you can be able to get the right knowledge that you need when you need it, and then a thought process. And that's exactly when goes back to, you go down to when you're stuck, you go to the concept, because that's where the knowledge is. That's where you get the knowledge.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize another thing that you said in that vein. I've come to realize that concepts are only means to propositions. Propositions are what we live by. We don't conquer nature by thinking star, but the star is far away, you're on your road to your knowledge. A proposition is the downloading of the knowledge that's stored in the concept into an identifications. I say here, and how we know at the end of the section of a chapter on propositions, the proposition is a means of bringing to mind and applying to the subject the knowledge stored in concepts. The primary direction of information flow is from the predicate to the subject. The predicate illuminates the subject by bringing stored knowledge to bear upon it. Propositions are knowledge appliers. Otherwise,
good.
you're just building up inventory, so to
That's
speak.
pretty good. Is there some book where we can read that stuff?
It is available at popular prices.
There it is. Yeah, good.
Uh,
That's good. I like that.
yeah, so I am wholeheartedly on your not only on your side but on your wavelength about that. And she says in the beginning of Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, in the foreword, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it real quickly, but she says, if you think this is not important, realize that all our knowledge is held in the form of concepts. Oh, here it is. The issue of concepts known as the problem, paragraph 2, of universals is philosophy's central issue. Since man's knowledge is gained and held in conceptual form, the validity of man's knowledge depends on the validity of concepts. And the file folder analogy, of course, is the file holds knowledge. That's what it does.
So, Steve, have we gotten any? Has anyone been bringing up questions or anything that we should look at? You usually monitor that stuff.
I've tried to read some of them. We have Ryan from Existence University. He's one of our fans, and he said a couple of things here.
Yeah.
But it's not coming. I have a question, or I have a distinction that I'd like to make. If I can find something, or if Ryan would like to put something up. The distinction that Lee makes about inklings, I think would have saved me decades of development in my own introspection. Because just introspecting on emotions is something that is appropriate for youngsters to do, because that's where you start. But when you get to a certain level, it's important to not shove emotion to the side, but to be aware that they're inklings. I'm trying to direct and be purposefully aware, and I'm directing I'm going somewhere as a developed person now. So inklings about my thoughtful introspection is just a key distinction that Lee has made. And I think if more people realized and used the idea of thoughtful introspection, it would save them decades or even their life. Because you can introspect on your emotions forever. And
I mean, an inkling is sort of in the general category of emotion, but
yes.
Particular, what I mean there is inklings, a feeling about a thought, and it gives you a direction. It doesn't give you an answer.
Do you have your chart? That was a terrific thing you had.
Yeah, I have a
from
chart.
AHA
I don't. Can I share screen here, Steve?
Daniel can. Daniel's our producer. He says yes now. Yeah.
I can. Can I? Yes now. All right.
Yeah.
Let me see. Let me see what I can do about that. Let's see here. Well, there's. By the way, there's Curly. I'm trying to think, but nothing happens. But let's see if I can. There's the chart of inklings.
Green, if that helps.
Well, it's a funny. I think that's sort of objectivist blue, this color, but it's kind of borderline. Anyway, I've got it on the screen now. Do you see it?
No, I do not.
Okay, I haven't done share screen. That's That's what
Oh,
I have.
yeah.
I have to do it, right?
Yeah, it's a
That's
two-step process.
I have to do it. Yes. So
Okay.
share
I-
screen. Okay. 2, 1, 0, and then
There you go.
There it is.
there it is. But I need to get back to it, and there it is.
Yeah, that's great.
So we have a range of inklings of feelings about thoughts. Once every 1,000 years or so, you have Archimedes stepping out of the bathtub and says, "Eureka!" But even those of us who aren't at that at Archimedes level, we get aha experiences. When you really have been working on something hard and you've been trying to understand it, or you're trying to solve a problem, and you finally get the solution, and it all, usually there's one last little thing that falls into place, or oftentimes one last, and then you get it. Wow. And then you better be careful what you're doing at the time, because if you're doing, you can fall in. Anyway, you can get into trouble. Anyway, there's also just when you're reading stuff and you're trying to understand, and all of a sudden you understand it, the click of comprehension. And there are also feelings of being on the right track, that you're feeling of that you're in control of the thought process, or that the thought process is going along even without your being in control. You're on a roll, so to speak. And then things start getting a little negative, what you call stinklings, the tip of the tongue phenomenon, where you know something, or the answer, but you can't quite get it. It's not quite coming up. And sometimes it's very hard to make that thing come up. Sometimes you have to go away and come back to get it to come up. And then there are situations where you have little suspicions or discomforts or unease. You think you're going the wrong way, but you're not sure why. Or what I call the pebble in the shoe. You're pretty sure there's a key concept somewhere in your thinking that you haven't activated enough knowledge about. The but, or I have another favorite example, which I could give afterwards if we have time. But there are those circumstances. There are the feelings that you're just running off the track, or that you have a serious gap in your understanding. And then it comes down to sometimes you just feel totally confused. I've had that feeling. And even all the way down to I have no idea what's going on here. Everything is, I don't even know where to start. Well, where you start is try to identify a little introspection. Step back. By the way, to use introspection on your thought process effectively, I think it's important. And Harry has some words to say about this too, little slightly different words. But you step back stop doing what you're doing. You can't solve a problem and introspect on it exactly simultaneously, or it's hard. It's hard to do that. And so you want to step back and try to identify where the key concept is and work on that key concept, activate the knowledge you need, and then you can return to your thought process. And that's a continuing process. You can keep doing that all the time. You can focus something and then refocus. And it's always possible to go deeper. I don't believe when you're reading something that there's in general, that there's such a thing as full comprehension of anything. What there is when you read is there's enough comprehension for your purposes, and then you can stop. But you can always go deeper. And the way you go deeper is by finding another key concept. And you find one, and that leads to another key concept. That leads to another. And that's an open-ended process. That's why volition is important. And I think I'll stop there because I bet Harry has something he wants
Yeah,
to put in here.
I think you're right. That could be objective as blue-green. I misremembered it. Isn't that funny?
It's pretty close anyway.
And I think that's introspection. I had an image of that slide. Now, of course, it's possible that because of the lighting, it looked greener in the room I was in. But at any rate, the important thing is introspectively, I can compare the green I remember with the green I perceive, or the blue-green I perceive. So if you couldn't introspect, if you couldn't be directly aware, that wouldn't be possible. So I mean we're pretty much in agreement, and I love that chart because it shows that it's rich. there are levels, there are shades, there are gradient. It's not just, you might have an inkling, you might not. I don't see it. Okay, we'll move on. There's all kinds of feelings about how the cognitive process is going. And and then was it Steve said? Somebody said something, maybe it was Julie, about these things are alerts. And it reminded me of Gene thinks that emotions in general are alerts to a value that is facing an alternative. She has a word for it. A value is at stake. It's either going to be helped or hurt, and that's what the emotions are, quote, telling you, quote. And so it's helpful to look at them, even about the external world, as alerts to the value significance of something. Might be wrong alert. Might
the
be
automatized value significance.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, your emotions are not necessarily they do not necessarily reflect your objective values. They may or may not. What is objectively a value for you? You may have an emotion that's contrary to that. You can.
I wouldn't know. I never had that.
It never happens to him. Okay. Well, I guess if you're completely, 100% integrated from the time of birth, you may never have had that experience.
Well,
okay.
even Galt had it. Even Galt had it in Atlas, and as a example. There must be some French phrase for that. Deliberate example.
So we're going to be doing these about every month, right, Lee? That's what
something like that. Maybe we can do them a little more often than that. It kind of depends. I mean, we all have things to do, and this is. But I think we can just try to set up some kind of schedule. But we're going to go on and look for other things to do some focused thinking on. And we have a number of things, and I know Bob has a few things, and we'd like to get Harry back here sometime.
Most definitely.
Too. There's plenty
on rare occasion.
Okay, yeah, rare occasions, right?
You're unpaid.
Yes.
I'm
okay,
unpaid.
So rare occasions, right? Yes.
There's one other thing I wanted to mention, which probably I should have said it at the very start. It has to do with motivation for introspection. Could Ayn Rand have gotten her theory of concepts without introspection? No, clearly not. And what is the most important failure of our society today? It's that we're anti-conceptual. And we're saying that, hey, in order to be conceptual, you have to have introspection.
Yes.
So,
and you have
we're
to have
now
volition.
Motivated to investigate introspection.
Volition is a prerequisite of conceptual level, and I'm saying introspection is necessary to guide volition. So that creates a certain tension with what I said earlier, that introspection is always is basically conceptual, because that doesn't quite, the causal sequence doesn't quite work. It's complicated. There's some back and forth stuff going on there. But yes, we need the conceptual level. You need to have introspection for that. You need to have volition for that. For introspection, there's that famous passage in ITOE, which I can't.
I haven't.
Exactly. You have the passage, the one that was, if people could introspect, they'd be giants. They'd be
if this were
giants.
True.
Yeah.
This is where the George Walsh was saying, you can't be mistaken about an introspective report. And
sure,
she says, if this were true, we would be living in Atlantis, because if men truly identified by introspection, I would even change it. If men identified introspectively their inner states 1/10 as correctly as they identify objective reality, we would be a race of ideal giants. I ascribe psychologically 95% and perhaps more of all psychological trouble and personal tragedies to the fact that in the realm of introspection, we are on the level where savages were, or lower on the level of extrospection. Men are not only taught, but they are actively discouraged. Men, this is not completely grammatic. This is the unedited version.
Yeah.
Men are not only not taught, bracket, to introspect, but they are actively discouraged from engaging in introspection, and yet their lives depend on it. Without that, nothing is possible to them, including concept formation.
Mhm.
So she was pretty definite.
And that's a good quote to end on, don't you think, Lee? Or do you have,
Well, unless Harry wants to say something else,
okay, if anybody,
I think or are there other questions? Bob?
I'm tempted to say everybody automatically has volition and knows they have volition, but they don't automatically introspect. That is, they choose, but they don't introspect.
Yeah, everybody has volition. I'm not so sure about the know. They know at some
Well,
level, but they end up not knowing it. I mean, there are a
well,
lot of Sam Harrises in the world.
I was trying to throw in
Yeah.
for humorous effect. They automatically
Oh,
have
okay. Oh, I see. I see. Okay. I didn't catch that
They
little
get the
trick there.
sense. They get a sense that they
Yeah.
choose.
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, well,
Oh, very good.
thank you to Dr. Binswanger for coming on.
Yes.
And thank you,
Thanks a lot.
Daniel, for being our producer. And we will see you guys next time when we'll put something up on our channel. Thanks for watching.
Yeah.